Okay, let me carry on with our discussion of Mill by backing up just a little bit and looking at this argument he gives us. He says, the only way in which a human being can make some approach to knowing the whole of a subject is by hearing what can be said about it by persons of every variety of opinion, and studying all modes in which it can be looked at by every character of mind. No wise man ever acquired his wisdom in any mode but this, nor is it in the nature of the human intellect to become wise in any other manner. In other words, you have to hear the opposite side if your own belief is going to be rational and justified. Otherwise, you don't have good reasons for holding your own beliefs. Okay, here's the formalization of it. And let me try to illustrate this by say, let's take some claim. Like, I believe the earth is round. What Mill is saying is that I don't have a justified belief that the earth is round unless I've heard the argument from the flat earth folk. Okay? So Sasser's belief that the earth is round is justified only if Sasser hears disbelievers, flat earthers, argue against it. If disbelief in a round earth is silence, if the flat earthers are silenced, then Sasser will never get to hear disbelievers argue against his belief that the earth is round. So if disbelief in a round earth is silenced, then Sasser's belief in a round earth is no longer justified. And you may not act on unjustified beliefs for which you have no reason for holding. Therefore, if disbelief in a round earth is silenced, then we may no longer continue silencing disbelief in a round earth because we don't have justification for believing in a round earth in the first place. So how can we silence the flat earthers? That's the argument. Now he adds a couple illustrations to this. He says, look, here's what happens when you silence views that you think are crazy. The Athenians executed Socrates. This is a painting of Socrates about to drink the hemlock. And Jesus was crucified by his opponents. Why? Because the people thought that their teachings were false and dangerous. If you start silencing people that you think their views are false and dangerous, you're going to be, and history will frown on you for doing that. You'll be like those people that killed Socrates and Jesus. Now, here's a possible objection to Mill's view. You might object to the first premise of his argument. The first premise said that Sasser's belief that the earth is round is justified only if Sasser hears the flat earthers argue against it. You might think, that's not true. There are some views, you might think, that you don't need to hear the other side in order to have a justified belief. For example, I might be justified in believing that 2 plus 2 equals 4, even if I never hear anybody argue that 2 plus 2 equals 5. Right? I might be justified, you might think, in believing that triangles have 3 sides, even if I've never heard anybody try to convince me that triangles have 4 sides. So math and geometry seem like they might provide a counterexample to premise 1 here. Here's what Mill replies. Mill says, you're right about math and geometry. They are the exception to my principle because there's really literally nothing that can be said on the wrong side of questions of math and geometry. But he says in every other subject, science, morality, anything, there's always a counter argument on the other side, and it has to be heard. He gives it some examples. So, some people may disagree with the heliocentric view of the galaxy. That's heliocentric means the sun is at the center. They used to believe, of course, that the earth was at the center. They had a geocentric view. Mill says you have to hear the argument from the geocentric people if you're going to have a justified belief in the heliocentric theory. The same goes for theories of phlogiston and oxygen. I won't go into that. Or the flat earth and round earth theories. He wants to say, unless you've heard the case from the flat earthers, you have no justification for believing in a round earth. And he has this great famous quote here. He says, he who knows only his own side of the case knows little of that. Now, I think this is a provocative argument here, and we could raise a lot of questions. I mean, you might just think about it. Really? I mean, do you need to hear the argument from the flat Earth people before you have good grounds for believing in a round Earth? I mean, how many have you have heard the flat Earth argument? Probably too many. But do you really need to? Or, have you ever heard, maybe you believe that, your mom is a human being and not a zombie. But have you heard the case for someone arguing that she in fact is a zombie? Do you need to hear the case for your mom being a zombie before you have the right to believe that she's a human? Think about it. I don't know. On the other hand, you don't want to kill Socrates, do you? Don't kill Socrates. Here's another thing to worry about. Do you think Mill's harm principle is correct? And are you sure that paternalism and moralism are wrong? And in particular, think about psychological harm. I mean, you might think, if you're Mill, look, words don't hurt people. They don't physically hurt them. No matter what I say, no matter how crazy my ideas are, that doesn't cause any physical harm to anybody. But surely words can cause great psychological harm, right? And I think many of us would think that psychological harm can be actually far more brutal than physical harm. You can recover from most physical injuries, but there's things that people might have said to you which are going to make you a crippled person the rest of your life. Well, if that's true, then does the harm principle really protect free speech? Maybe the harm principle requires us to silence harmful speech. Well, then we've got to decide which speech really is harmful. Is any speech that hurts anybody's feelings harmful, and can it be silenced? What if I feel my feelings get hurt when you criticize the flat earth theory? I'm hurt by that. I'm psychologically crippled by the fact that you've rejected the beliefs of my community in this decisive way and characterized us all as fools. I'm hurt by that. So does the harm principle then say, all right, we can silence critics of the flat earth theory? Something to think about. And more things. You could let's think beyond just speech. How do you think the harm principle would apply to these kinds of issues? Welfare, abortion, legalization of drugs like heroin, euthanasia. Think about the whole range of think about seatbelt laws, smoking laws. Think about the whole range of kind of social issues and think, how would Mill's harm principle apply? What would it permit us to do and forbid us from doing? And think as well about Mill's view of what Plato might say about Mill's view of liberty. What would Plato say here? He's got a very different view of social justice than Mill. And if you know anything about utilitarianism, you could ask yourself, is Mill's harm principle compatible with Mill's utilitarian moral theory? That's another important, interesting, and vexed question, which I'll leave you with.